Hey guys, has anybody else noticed how slow our combat seems?
Yeah, but it's not my fault. Swinging a sword is easy.
And so is stabby. The real problem is the wizard.
Well, it's not my fault that I have a thick spell book and choosing a spell is difficult.
Yeah, but we only play every 2 weeks. Don't you think you could read your spell book when we're not playing?
That would make choosing a spell easier when you know what they actually do.
Holy crap, there's hope for the moron yet.
Hey, stop being mean!
Now hold on a second, everyone. It's not fair to blame the wizard for everything. For instance, the barbarian is always off in La La Land when it's his turn, and then we have to remind him what's even going on in the game. And then the rogue takes forever finding enough dice for his sneak attack, then he has to roll them, and then we gotta wait for him to count up the result.
Yeah, especially on a critical hit.
And the fighter never knows what the DC of his battle maneuvers are, even though he's been playing a battle master for over 2 years now.
You suck.
And the druid spends so much time lovey-doveying Fat Cat that everybody has forgotten that Fat Cat died several videos ago, and the druid is dead too. You all laugh, but I don't like where this is heading. As a matter of fact, the rogue and fighter are dead too. And the wizard? Yeah, they were all right. You take forever in combat. Dead too.
I'm really sorry for being super slow, Mr. Dungeon Master, sir. Please don't kill me.
Actually, I think the wizard killed me a few videos ago too, so I should be dead also, I guess.
Combat's gonna be really fast now.
Welcome to the DM Lair. I'm Luke Hart, and I've been high since Dungeon Master School. On this channel, I give practical Dungeon Master advice that you can implement at your game table. Today in the Lair, I'm going to give you 12 tips to speed up your combat in Dungeons & Dragons. But first, I want to let you know that my Kickstarter, Into the Fae, is now accepting pre-orders. Into the Fae is a level 1 to 5 adventure module featuring lots of new Fae creations and magic items, and is designed to be friendly for both new Dungeon Masters and new players. Yeah, that's right, no more TPKs at level 1 like other modules that we could name. So if you missed the Kickstarter but still want to get in on the action before it's too late, again, click on the link below to pre-order your copy today. All right, let's get into it. 12 tips to faster combat in Dungeons & Dragons. Now the first point that I want to make here is that faster combat, running a faster game, doesn't always necessarily equate to a better game. Because here's the thing, I love combat in Dungeons & Dragons. I love tactical combat. So like I could sit there for a half an hour to an hour to 2 hours in a combat, and I would be perfectly happy and content as a player. The point here is that if it's fun, and the length really shouldn't matter. However, if the long combat is also slow, feels slow, and is thus boring, well then that's where you want to get into speeding combat up a little bit. When it gets boring and feels slow. Because you could totally be in a combat that lasts 2 hours, but it feels like 15 minutes because you are engaged, you are loving it, and you are enjoying it. And that combat you don't want to mess with. But if it feels slow and you can see that your players are bored, you can see that they're pulling out their phones, they're on Facebook or something, or they're building dice towers, or they're having side conversations because it's just way too slow and boring, that's when you want to start doing some of these things to speed up your combat. Number 1, incorporate more role-playing into the combat so it doesn't feel like combat is long or slow. Okay, what do I mean by role-playing? Remember, role-playing is not just talky-talky. Role-playing is the entire game. Role-playing is combat, it is exploration, it is social interaction. But when I talk about role-playing in combat, what I'm talking about is actually describing what's going on, describing when you're hacking with your sword and the slash across that person's face, when you're retreating, holding up your shield cautiously because you're being attacked. When I talk about role-playing during combat, that's what I'm talking about. Because combat should not just be rolling dice and doing math. If that's all your combat is, then yeah, I can see how that would be pretty boring. And when you're the dungeon master, you should be narrating things. You should be describing things as they're happening during combat. And if you're lucky, if you have an awesome group of players, they're going to be doing the same thing as well. In my Curse of Strahd game that I'm running right now, I have a couple players who are really good about this. The monk especially will talk about doing a hook and then a side kick and then a spinning round kick. He'll describe these things in combat as it's going on. And if you're narrating it, if you're role-playing to that extent during combat, either as a player or as a dungeon master, then your combat is going to be far less boring than if you're just rolling dice and doing math. The next thing I like to do is have my enemies talk to the PCs during combat. This is usually taunting them as they're fighting them. So this social interaction, this two-way conversation can keep on going even after the little monologue or dialogue has stopped and combat has joined. Your players and the dungeon master can keep participating in this and keep it going, making things that much more dynamic and interesting. And if you can do these things, then you're gonna make combat that much more enjoyable for everybody at your game table. Number 2, players need to decide what they're doing quickly when it's their turn. Okay. What I have found to be the biggest thing that slows down combat is players sitting there when the Dungeon Master's like, yo, dude, it's your turn. And they're just sitting there like, oh yeah, let me see what I'm gonna do. They pull out their book, they're looking through their book, they're like, That I have found to be the most impactful thing to slow or fast combat. So if you can get your players to quickly tell you what they're going to do when it's their turn, that is gonna speed up your combat more than almost any other thing that I can help you with, any other tip that I can give you. And here's the thing, the players are gonna be like, well, I need time to think about what I'm gonna do. Yeah, we're gonna give you time. Okay, you want some time? All right, there are 5 players. When it's not your turn, Jim Bob, Sammy, Natalie, and Creepy names. They're all taking their turns and they're all doing their things. That gives you, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes maybe even just 5 minutes to think about what you're gonna do. I mean, you have time if you utilize it. I'm not very good at just improving names. This is why I use a random name generator. I have a player named Creepy. Wow. And the classic objection that I'll get to this is, but Luke, things have changed over the course of the combat round, so now I have to reevaluate what I'm gonna do. And I'm like, dude, the whole idea of a combat round in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is that all of your guys' turns are happening simultaneously over the same 6 seconds. I know there are some dungeon masters in some groups where they will literally go around the table, each person declares what they're going to do on the round really quickly, and then they resolve people's actions and you are not allowed to change what you're doing. And this helps represent the idea that in the fury of combat, in the heat of combat, you don't have time to analyze what each person did in the last couple seconds and then decide what you're going to do and take your leisurely time to look over your spells and your character sheet. No, it doesn't work that way, dude. It's gotta be boom, 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 and then resolve. One little thing you can do here to show your players that the clock is ticking, that they don't have forever to decide what they're going to do, is simply use either an hourglass. I've used a 30-second hourglass that I'll turn over to mark people's time so they know that they have to tell me what they're going to do. But 30 seconds is a lot of time to think. Also, you might just count off on your fingers. Just one, silently. And then when you get to 5, boom. You could have them dodge, for instance, or they just get skipped. And let me tell you, a player's only going to get skipped once or twice before they radically speed up how quickly they tell you what they're doing, because nobody wants to get skipped. And if you don't like using the stick, you can use a carrot too. Tell them that if they tell you what they're going to do within 10 seconds, say, they get a +1 bonus to their to hit or their save if they're casting a spell. That's like, the carrot, rewarding them if they can speed their butts up. Number 3, do not allow a group discussion at the start of every player's turn. All right, we know how this goes. We know how it goes. Jim Bob took his turn, and then it's Natalie's turn, and all of the players have to opine on what Natalie should do. And when this happens at the beginning of every single player's turn, a group committee discussion about what they should do, holy crap, your game just drags down to a crawl. So the number one thing here is just not to allow that to happen. But your players are going to want to discuss things. And granted, it's a game. They want to discuss. They want to have tactics. You want the game to be enjoyable for them. So you don't want to just like beat them with a stick if they want to talk about things. So as a solution to this, I have a house rule. whereby my players at the beginning of each round can discuss tactics for that round. And then, during each player's turn during that round, they are not allowed to get into group discussions about what everybody's going to do. And what I have found is that this reduces dramatically the amount of times that the players will try to fall into a group discussion on a given player's turn. And if they do try to fall into that committee discussion, I will just call attention to it and say, hey guys, let's not drop into a committee discussion because you guys got to do this at the beginning of the round, or at the beginning of the round. And my players will be like, oh yeah, that's right, yeah, that's right, okay, cool. And then we move on. Number 4, track hit points with tick marks by multiples of 10. All right, here's the thing. I learned this years ago. Adding and subtracting hit points just takes too long. And somebody's gonna be like, it's just math. It's like addition and subtraction. You can't handle that? Dude, no, I can't. Because I'm trying to run a fast-paced, dynamic, interesting combat, and adding and subtracting detracts from that. Every little tiny mental gymnastic thing that I have to run through as I'm balancing the entire narrative, the entire combat, and everything that's going on, adjudicating everything, every little tiny thing adds to that. So if I can get rid of having to add and subtract hit points, I am making huge strides toward being able to run that game better for my players. So what do I mean by tracking hit points in multiples of 10? So if an enemy has, say, 40 hit points, when a player attacks that enemy, if they do 5 damage, I round up and I just put a tick mark there. And if they only did 2 damage, I just don't put a tick mark, I don't track it. The next player hits them for 8 damage, I round up to 10, and they have 2 tick marks. And I just continue like that until I get 4 tick marks because the enemy has 40 hit points, and then the enemy dies. It averages out over the long haul. It saves you tons of time as a dungeon master with like keeping track of hit points. It works very, very well. And if anybody's like, it's not precise enough, it's not exact enough, well, who says that every single monster in the monster manual, every orc, for instance, has the exact same amount of hit points? It's not realistic. Every player's fighter doesn't have the same amount of hit points, so not every orc would either. And so if things are a little bit higher or lower, if it's not super precise, you're not really losing anything compared to the amount of speed that you gain and the reduction on a dungeon master's mental gymnastics, let's say. Number 5, players should learn how their characters work. It's like, duh, Luke, of course they should learn how their characters work. Okay, but you anybody who's been a dungeon master long enough, I feel, should be able to commiserate and understand this idea that I'm putting forth, what I'm suggesting here, because there have been many fine and wonderful and beautiful players that have come to my table that have rolled up a character, and we could be playing for months, perhaps years, and they still don't know how their abilities work, how their spells work, and those sorts of things. So it's just like a plea. If players, if you could learn those sorts of things, you're gonna help us all out. And why? Because in the midst of combat, when you don't know how your abilities and spells and things work, that slows the combat down. So please learn those things and do your dungeon master a favor. Somebody's like, Luke, my players are new, you're a jerk. Dude, new players get a pass. New players get grace, love, and mercy. Help your new players out. But when you have a player that's been in your game for like 6 months to a year and they're still not learning how their character works, I feel like the time for grace and love has probably passed. I mean, still love your players, don't hate them, but it's probably time to start getting a little bit like tough love. Tough love is what we're looking for at that point. Yeah, let's go with that. And lest we be biased toward the players, let me say too that the dungeon master should know how certain things work in the game as well. They should be familiar with how classes work and abilities work, and spells to some extent. I know there's lots of rules and there's a lot of stuff there, so I don't quite come down as hard on dungeon masters if they don't know how every single class and ability works, because I sure don't. But they should make forth an effort if you have a cleric in your game, if you have a warlock in your game, or an artificer, say, which are really cool, by the way. Eberron as a general rule is an awesome book game setting, by the way, you should all get it. But a dungeon master should learn these things if they have players that are playing these certain characters in their games. At least do your best. Put forth an effort. Number 6, let players see the initiative order so they can prepare for their turns. All right, this is pretty self-explanatory. When players can see the initiative order and they know that they're going to be up very soon, it's going to help them to hurry up and decide what they're going to do. I mean, and you can just tell your players, hey, here's the initiative order, please be ready on your turn. I know some dungeon masters will, when they call off that, hey, it's Jim Bob's turn, they'll say, Susie, you're on deck, please get ready. And then they'll do Jim Bob's turn, and then Susie's turn comes and she theoretically is ready to go. A couple quick ways you can display initiative on screen for your players. I mean, obviously if you're using something like Roll20, it shows it right on screen. There's no excuse. I know if you're playing in person, if anybody still plays in person these days, what with the pandemic and quarantine and the sad, lonely demise of miniatures being used on grids. It's so sad. I have so many minis that I would love to. Oh, okay. Anyway, so dungeon masters, you have screens. You can hang little like cards over the top of your screen that will show the order that your your players and your players and your enemies are going in. So yeah, you can do that too. I want to use menus again so bad. Sad thing that's happening. Number 7, use spellcasters less as a dungeon master and plan spells in advance.
Mommy, what are you doing over there? Oh, it's Mommy Cat.
This is Mommy Cat, yes.
That's my Mommy Cat.
Now she got on camera. I don't think I've had Mommy Cat on camera before. That's Mommy 2, by the way. I have 2 mommies. I have Mommy 1 and Mommy 2. That's Mommy 2. Anyway, back to spellcasters. The thing is that spellcasters do take more time to run as a dungeon master, so I try to use them a little bit more seldomly, less frequently as other sorts of creatures. And when I use them less, that means my turns as a dungeon master get sped up, which means combat overall gets sped up. However, spellcasters are very, very cool to use in the game, so you don't want to cut them out entirely. Instead, I have something very simple that I do that helps me run them more efficiently, more quickly, than if I had to like look through all of their spells that are listed there, look them up and try to figure out which one I'm gonna cast on any given turn. So what I do is I will plan out, say, the first 3 rounds of spells in advance. I'll know that, okay, I'm gonna open with Fireball because Fireball, and then I'm gonna do a suggestion, and then I'm probably gonna do whatever. And that way I will at least have a general idea of what this spellcaster is going to do the first 3 rounds before he gets murderized, because most spellcasters don't last too long in combat. And quick tip here, I usually open with my 3 most powerful spells, the ones that will be most impactful in the combat, before I get murderized by the players. Now, yes, things could change, your plan might fall apart, so still have a general idea of what spells do that are on the spell list, so that if you need to change them, you can do it quickly without spending 20 minutes in the player handbook looking up spells. Number 8, speed up the dice. There are several things that groups can do to make rolling dice and adding results take less time. I think that one of them is probably just to have the dice available that you need at the game table. I remember once I had a rogue who had like crap tons of sneak attack damage, and then every time she would get a critical hit, which would happen somewhat frequently it seemed, she would have to like borrow dice from other people. There was this big thing about getting enough dice for her to roll. It slowed things down a little bit, you know. Maybe it might have taken several minutes to roll dice. Paladins have a similar thing a lot of times with their smites on crits. So, you know, maybe we should just ban rogues and paladins, and then things would be easier. You could also have players roll their damage with the attack roll, so that way you just got 1 roll. If it hits, boom, your damage is right there already. And if you're playing on virtual tabletops like Roll20, it does this automatically, so everything is sped up. I mean, in general, playing on virtual tabletops speeds up lots of things, in all honesty. Next thing, if you are a dungeon master, you should strongly consider using average damage. It makes rolling dice and adding take, well, very, very little time, because you don't have to add up your damage dice. You just take the average damage, boom, we're done. I have been doing this for several years now, and I can tell you that it makes it's so much faster and so much easier. It reduces the strain, the headache of adding things together. Like, again, you're like, Luke, you're just adding up dice. How hard is it? When you have several orcs that are all attacking and you're rolling dice and adding, rolling dice and adding, rolling dice and adding, it takes time, and it takes, again, it's more mental strain. A Dungeon Master is doing lots of things during combat. If I can take one thing off that's adding strain up here, then I am more relaxed, I am more at ease, I can run that combat better, and things go faster too. Number 9, when the outcome is already decided, resolve the combat narratively. Look, if it's obvious that the enemies are going to lose, that they're going to get murdered, or whatever, drop out of combat and just resolve that narratively. Either you as the Dungeon Master can describe the enemies surrendering or the players murderizing them, or you could ask your players to participate in this moment as well. I will frequently do this, from time to time I do this, and I will ask my players, say, hey, these enemies are pretty much defeated, this battle's pretty much over, would you guys like to describe what you do to them? Sometimes they'll just go in and describe these heroic moments of murderizing them. Other times, they'll describe how they take them into custody and tie them up. Just kind of depends on how they're feeling that day, I guess. This is also a way to encourage your players to roleplay their characters. When you drop out of that combat round, which can kind of tend to de-emphasize roleplaying, and you go back into narrative description, your players once again are a little bit more immersed in the roleplaying of describing how they wrap up that combat and what they do to those enemies. Number 10, fewer combatants means faster combat. I mean, if you have fewer players, obviously combat goes faster. In a group with 10 players, expect combat to take a while. In a group with 3 players, it'll be a lot faster. But of course, you can't always, you can't just be like, all right, guys, we're gonna get rid of 5 of you because combats are too long. You can't exactly do that to your players. I mean, some Dungeon Masters probably would, but I don't recommend that practice. Instead, what you can do as a Dungeon Master is limit the number of enemies that you put into the combat. So instead of having 10 enemies at CR3, you might have, 5 enemies at CR5. What you can also do is, instead of increasing hit points on enemies that you might be homebrewing, leave their hit points at a smaller pool and increase their damage that they do. When hit point pools are bigger, combats take longer. When hit point pools are smaller, combats naturally go faster. But if you adjust the DPS up, well, then you have more or less the same effect as far as challenge rating goes. I think that makes sense. I hope that makes sense to you. It makes sense to me. Next thing you can do here is limit the number of summons in the game. The number of monsters, creatures, undead zombies, whatever, that your players can bring to their side to help them. Summons bog down the game big time. You read these posts on Reddit or something where they're like, oh yeah, we had this necromancer who had 15,000 zombies on his side, and they're like, oh, it was amazing, we had this awesome game, we were just bulldozing everything, and it was like, ah. It's a great story on Reddit, but you want to know what actually was happening at that game table? There was one person who was having a blast running the 15,000 zombies, the necromancer's player, of course. Well, everybody else at the game table was like, okay, really? How long is this turn gonna take? When am I gonna get to play the game? So yeah, I have a house rule of 2 summons, maximum 2 summons, and it speeds things up amazingly. Number 11, lower the hit points and increase the DPS of enemies. Kind of already explained this a little bit in one of my previous points, but basically when you have a smaller hit point pool, enemies die faster, which means combat is faster, but if you increase their DPS, that means the challenge rating is mostly the same. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this before. This is one of those, I don't have enough points, so I'm just gonna take one that I've couched somewhere else and turn it into a number 11 just to make this video longer. I don't know if I'm fooling anybody with this. The same goes when you're adjusting combats on the fly. This is a new point, I feel. Sometimes Dungeon Masters will want to adjust to combat on the fly. And the temptation when you have an underwhelming combat where the enemies are getting cleaned up very, very fast is to just increase their hit point pool. This, of course, will make the combat take longer. I would recommend instead that you increase their DPS on the fly rather than just increasing their hit points. This will make to up the challenge without necessarily lengthening the combat. And you can use any manner of flavor of story justifications to say why they're suddenly doing more damage. They're getting desperate, they raged, they drank a little potion that gave them a little woo boost or something. Who knows? Use your brain, use your creativity, you can figure it out. Or you don't even explain how it happened. Your players will be like, well, why'd that happen? And then they will sit there and they will discuss it and they will think it and analyze it and they will solve your justification problem for themselves, for you. Number 12, make sure the players are paying attention so you don't repeat yourself. This is the thing, right? You got the players on the cell phone. He's like, Facebook, I don't know, whatever he's doing, looking up Jeremy Crawford's stuff to prove you wrong, whatever he happens to be doing. And then when it's their turn, they have no idea what's going on, and somebody's got to give them a recap and be like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And the player's like, oh, yeah. You gotta stamp that stuff down. Don't let the players not pay attention like that and then be like, oh, I need a recap. Nah. However, a point could be made here that they might be distracted and bored and not paying attention because your game isn't interesting and dynamic and fun enough. So don't always default to blaming the players. Sometimes the Dungeon Masters need to take a little bit of responsibility here too. Don't forget to follow me over on Twitch, where I live stream every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, answer your D&D questions, and even play D&D from time to time. Let me know in the comments your top tip for speeding up combat. Next week, I'll be discussing my Dungeon Master tools of the trade, the stuff that I use in my D&D games. But until then, click right here to learn 5 reasons your D&D game may suck and how to make it better. And until next time, let's play D&D.